Chapter 1. A general refutation of Gaunilon's argument. It is sound that a being than which a greater cannot be conceived exists in reality. You say, whosoever you may be, who say that a fool is capable of making these statements, that a being than which a greater cannot be conceived is not in the understanding in any other sense than that in which a being that is altogether inconceivable in terms of reality is in the understanding. You say that the inference that this being exists in reality from the fact that it is in the understanding is no more just than the inference that a lost island most certainly exists from the fact that when it is described the hero that is does not doubt that it is in his understanding. But I say, if a being then which a greater is inconceivable is not understood or conceived, and is not in the understanding or in concept, certainly either God is not a being than which a greater is conceivable, or else he is not understood or conceived, and is not the understanding or in concept. But I call on your faith and conscience to attest that this is most false. Hence, that which a greater cannot be conceived is truly understood and conceived, and is in the understanding and in concept. Therefore, either the grounds on which you try to controvert me are not true, or else the inference which you think to base logically on those grounds is not justified. But you hold, moreover, that supposing that a being than which a greater cannot be conceived is understood, it does not follow that this being is in the understanding, nor, if it is in the understanding, does it therefore exist in reality. In answer to this, I maintain positively, if that being can be even conceived to be, it must exist in reality, for that than which a greater is conceivable cannot be conceived except as without beginning. But whatever can be conceived to exist and does not exist, can be conceived to exist through a beginning. Hence, what can be conceived to exist but does not exist is not the being than which a greater cannot be conceived. Therefore, if such a being can be conceived to exist, necessarily is that it does exist. Furthermore, if it can be conceived at all, it must exist, for no one who denies or doubts the existence of a being than which a greater is inconceivable, denies or doubts that, if it did exist, its non-existence, either in reality or in the understanding, would be impossible, for otherwise it would not be a being than which a greater cannot be conceived. But as to whatever can be conceived but does not exist, if there were such a being, its not existence, either in reality or in the understanding, would be possible. Therefore, if a being then which a greater is inconceivable can be even conceived, it cannot be non-existent. But let us suppose that it does not exist, even if it can be conceived. Whatever can be conceived but does not exist, if it existed, would not be a being than which a greater is inconceivable. If then there were a being a greater than which is inconceivable, it would not be a being than which a greater is conceivable, which is not most absurd. Hence, it is false to deny that a being than which a greater cannot be conceived exists, if it can be even conceived, much the more. Therefore, if it can be understood or can be in the understanding. Moreover, I will venture to make this assertion without doubt: whatever at any place or at any time does not exist, even if it does not exist at some place or at some time, can be conceived to exist nowhere and never, as at some place and at some time it does not exist. For what did not exist yesterday and exists today, as it is understood not to have existed yesterday, so it can be apprehended by the intelligence that it never exists. and what is not here and, and is elsewhere can be conceived to be nowhere, just as it is not here. So with regard to an object of which the individual parts do not exist at the same places or times, all its parts, and therefore its very whole, can be conceived to exist nowhere and never, or never. For although time is said to exist always, and the word everywhere, yet time does not as a whole exist always, nor the word as a whole everywhere. And as individual parts of time do not exist when others exist, so they can be conceived never to exist. And so it can be apprehended by the intelligence that individual parts of the world exist nowhere, as they do not exist where other parts exist. Moreover, what is composed of parts can be dissolved in concept and be not existent. Therefore, whatever at any place or at any time does not exist as a whole, even even if it is existent, can be conceived not to exist. But that than which a greater cannot be conceived, if it exists, cannot be conceived not to exist. Otherwise, it is not a being than which a greater cannot be conceived, which is inconsistent. By no means, then, does it at any place or at any time fail to exist as a whole, but exists as a whole everywhere and always. Do you believe that this being can in some way be conceived or understood, or that or that the being with regard to which these things are understood can be in concept or in the understanding? For if it cannot, these things cannot be understood with reference to it. But if you say that it is not understood, and that it is not in understanding, because it is not totally understood, you should say that a man who cannot face the direct rays of the sun does not see the light of day, which is none other than the sunlight. Assuredly, a being than which a greater cannot be conceived exists and is in the understanding, at least to this existence, that the statements regarding it are understood.